So what are the ILO standards? You might have come across the ILO standards when you researched how to exercise due diligence throughout your supply chain. But what are the ILO labor standards and what are the ILO core labor standards exactly? Do they even concern you and your company? Which companies in your supply chain do they concern? Who created them? And most importantly, are they legally binding? Hello there, my name is Hendrik, last name is Mosel like the river or the wine. Depends on you. I'm a social auditor, having audited many hundreds of companies all over Europe. My team and I work with over 100 different social audit programs. During social audits, we assess if working conditions follow applicable labor and social standards. ILO standards are used as the basis or at least the reference point by many of our clients and social audit programs. Who created the ILO standards? The ILO labor standards as well as the ILO core labor standards were created by the ILO. But who or what is the ILO? ILO stands for International Labour Organization. It is a specialized agency of the United Nations. Other UN agencies you might be familiar with are UNICEF, the FAO or the WHO. The ILO was founded in 1919 and is in fact the oldest specialized agency of the United Nations. Now, as the ILO is an agency of the United Nations, are all member states of the UN also members of the ILO? No, but almost. The UN has currently 193 member states. Of those 193 UN members, 186 plus the Cook Islands are members of the ILO. What does the International Labour Organization, the ILO, actually do? If you ever wondered whose task it is to create international labour and social standards, it is the responsibility of the International Labour Organization, ILO. Makes sense. I mean, they call themselves the International Labour Organization. The created labour and social standards are subdivided into different protocols, recommendations and conventions, like the Forced Labour Convention, ILO 29, or the Minimum Age Convention, ILO 138. Okay, so the ILO is an agency of the UN and they write some protocols, recommendations and conventions. So what? Are the international labour and social standards set by the International Labour Organization mandatory for all member states? Well, for these standards to come into effect in any given member state, like Germany, the Netherlands or the Czech Republic, these labour and social standards need to be transferred into local law. This is called ratification, and the ratification of ILO standards by a state is in fact not mandatory. However, once a standard is adopted by the ILO, member states are at least required to submit it to their competent authority. This would usually be the parliament. The member states have to submit the adopted ILO standard within a period of 12 months for consideration. In the case of ILO conventions, on these we will focus here, this means consideration for ratification. So are all of the ILO standards, or at least some, legally binding for you or your suppliers? That depends on which countries you or they operate in and if those countries have ratified the ILO standards. But there's one more reason the ILO standards might still be relevant and binding for you and your supply chain. We will get to that crucial aspect in a bit. But first, for you to get a better understanding and a better picture of the ILO conventions, how many conventions are there and which ones are of the highest importance? To answer the first part, 191. That's it. As the ratification of the ILO standards is not mandatory, not all ILO member states have ratified all 191 conventions. Far from it. Let's take Germany as an example, where I'm based. Germany has ratified 87 conventions and 2 protocols. To this date, 61 of which are still in force. And with that, Germany is among the countries with the comparatively higher number of ratifications. In comparison, the United States of America have ratified just 14 conventions, of which 10 are still in force today. At the beginning of this video, I was talking about the ILO core labor standards, and many of our clients ask their suppliers to at least follow these ILO core labor standards. Not all ILO standards, but at least those. What are the ILO core labor standards and how many are there? The ILO core labor standards, as you might have guessed from the name, are of certain significance. They are derived directly from the human rights and the following 4 fundamental principles: the freedom of association and right to bargain collectively, the abolition of forced labor, the elimination of child labor, the prohibition of discrimination in employment and occupation. Of the currently 191 conventions, 8 are summarized as core labor standards. These are the 8 core labor standards: Forced Labor Convention, the Abolition of Forced Labor Convention, the Freedom of Association and Protection of the Right to Organize Convention, the Right to Organize and Collective Bargaining Convention, the Equal Remuneration Convention, the Discrimination, Employment and Occupation Convention, the Minimum Age Convention, and the Worst Forms of Child Labor Convention. If we take Germany as an example again, Germany has ratified all of those 8 core labor standards or core labor conventions. The last one in 2002. Here's an overview for you showing how many of the 186 ILO members, plus the Cook Islands, have ratified at least the ILO core labor standards in its entirety. This table is taken from a study that Mark Starmans, Maren Bartel and myself wrote for the German government. It was published in 2021. Precisely, it was for the German Procurement Office of the Federal Ministry of the Interior. From the table you can see that between 155 and 187 states ratified the ILO core conventions. So not all member states have even ratified all of the 8 core conventions. The only convention that all 187 members of the ILO have adopted into their local system is the ILO 182. Worst Forms of Child Labor Convention. So what do you think? Has the country you are based in implemented at least all of the 8 ILO core conventions? You might be surprised. If you want me to go deeper into the individual requirements of these conventions, let me know in the comments. Earlier I've said that there is one more reason the ILO standards might still be relevant and binding for you and your supply chain, even if they are not written into local law. Here's how. How are the ILO standards, especially the ILO core labor standards, important even for companies that operate in countries which have not ratified the ILO standards in question? As the International Labour Organization, the ILO, is a specialized agency of the United Nations and their main task is to set international labor and social standards, these standards, especially the core standards, are widely accepted by a pretty high number of countries globally. They do set minimum standards that big international corporations like to refer to and use as a basis for their corporate social responsibility programs. If a company wants to supply materials or services to those big players, suppliers might be required to adhere to the client's code of conduct and ethical requirements. This code of conduct probably also includes at least the ILO core labor standards. To make these requirements legally binding, they usually embed them into contractual agreements between the involved parties. Now, the company that wants to supply goods or services to these big corporations might just sign the supplier code of conduct without actually following it. And take my word for it, I've personally visited and audited many of those types of companies, even in Western Europe. Some companies I've audited had even included the ILO core labor standards into their own code of conduct, so they did not just sign the client's code, but the ILO core labor standards were embedded into their own code. Still, they did not follow them. So they had their own code, but they didn't follow their own code. And I can tell you, those are some interesting conversations with the top management of those companies. Once you figure out as a social auditor, they have their own code, but they don't even follow their own standards. Trust is good, but sometimes verification is just better. Our clients want to be certain that their selected suppliers for materials as well as services follow both local requirements and any other standards that they deem relevant, like the ILO core labor standards. If you have any questions, would like to request consultations or ask us to help you by performing social audits, both at your own sites or your suppliers, maybe make a gap analysis with regards to client-specific programs or programs like SMETA or RBA, you're hereby invited to reach out to us via the contact information in the description. Of course, we may also consult you on relevant labor and social standards, prepare your facilities for upcoming social audits, or set up an effective corporate social responsibility system for and with you. If you want your own people to be trained either as external or internal auditors, please reach out to us and we will see what services would suit your needs best. If you would like me to discuss any topics in future videos, let me know in the comments. See you in the next one.